bit later. This also develops into being able to think in a way that goes beyond simple mechanical thinking in our mind. It's what the Rosicrucians call sense-free thinking. It means that we can think in terms of pure archetypes. Our mind can now access the pure archetypes from the mind of God. And that's what sacred geometry was understood to be by the Greeks. So what to us seems like a very abstract philosophy. What are they talking about? They're meditating on ideal types and all these geometric forms. What are the Greeks doing with that? Why are they wasting their time with it? They understood that what they were actually meditating on was sense-free thinking, being able to actually go into resonance with the actual forms from the mind of God that hold the patterns of everything in the world. It's a communion with the mind of God. And so true sacred geometry was always on that level. And this can also give rise to something called the new clairvoyance that we'll talk about in a moment, because the whole path of clairvoyance has changed over time. Because our state of consciousness used to be different, our way that we could perceive things spiritually was also different. As our consciousness changes, how we can perceive things spiritually transforms over time. And again, the I Am can transform our life force, and it transforms our life body into what is sometimes referred to as the immortal body. It has different names in different traditions. And then transforms the physical. So the whole process of internal alchemy at its highest level is related to this. And so to understand it within its full context, there's the understanding of the evolution of consciousness. One of the Rosicrucian practices that we'll talk about at the end of the talk, as far as practical exercises, is that they examine things in the living world to see the stages that it moves through. Because they understand that within a seed is the complete pattern matrix for everything that seed will ever do once it begins to grow and sprout and blossom and fruit and wither and decay and disappear. All those stages are hidden within the seed. And so all things go through this process. So when we observe the growth of a child, we see all of these stages one after another in a lawful process. The life of every human being, from an infant to old age, is a microcosmic fractal of what we go through over great periods of time in spiritual development. It follows a particular trajectory. So to clarify some of this, and this is a very general gloss on it, we descend originally from spirit to earth. And with human development, we went through a particular process that in the Indian tradition is referred to as Kali Yuga. This Kali Yuga spiritual tradition was understood as being the spiritual dark age. And depending on which of the Indian teachers you talk to, some say that we're still in Kali Yuga and will be for a long time to come. Others, such as in the Sri Yuktasvara Babaji lineage, say that it's actually already ended. And actually, the timing of the Kali Yuga Dark Age for human evolution is exactly the same for the ending point between the European Rosicrucians and the Babaji Sri Yuktasvara lineage, which is a very interesting link. So in this Kali Yuga Dark Age, we had a particular situation take place. In the early times, human beings were not self-aware. You study ancient texts, they're always identifying themselves with the tribe, the group. I am so-and-so, the Philistine, the Samarite, whatever it might be. They always identify with the group. In ancient Greece, to be exiled from your city was like a fate worse than death. Today, it's like, you're not going to put me in jail, I just get to leave the city? Great, I'm gone. But for them, to be separated from the group was terrible. It was a punishment because they had a group consciousness. So they weren't self-aware, but what they did have in early times was a lot of clairvoyance. And so you still see this with some of the traditional peoples on the earth today. Those traditional peoples preserve this type of native clairvoyance that can be quite strong. And the Rosicrucians see as actually it's being related to the blood in a particular way. So what happens over time is that as we become more self-aware, we're not fully self-aware, but we're moving toward it. We're becoming more individual in our self-awareness. This leads to what the great teachers in ancient India referred to as the Kali Yuga Dark Age, because literally the clairvoyance is going dark. The people in India are losing their clairvoyant faculties, and we can no longer directly see spirit. And so there's a kind of a panic that you can see in some of these old texts that leads to the teaching of, well, the physical world's an illusion. You're about to get stranded here. This is actually a place of suffering. So get off the cycle of karma and reincarnation, off the suffering, and just go back to the spiritual world, to nirvana permanently. But it was not understood the complete sequence of this, at least the way the Rosicrucians see it. So human beings began to more and more lose the ability to clairvoyantly perceive the world around them, but they develop the ability to think in a logical, linear way and to think of themselves as more of a separate individual being. This develops over time until we reach a kind of a low point of this that is the nadir point that the Rosicrucians see as what happened around the time of the incarnation of the Christ being within Jesus of Nazareth. That is a human being attaining the state that creates the template for the rest of humanity to actually unite with the Christ being and develop that state of awareness. And so there's actually two different movements happening here simultaneously. There's an ascending movement and a descending movement. Our capacity for developing higher consciousness is going up at the same time as, in a way, we're contracting into more and more of an individual contracted state. I'm not going to get into the complete counter-movement thing here tonight because it's just too involved, but I think you get the basic idea. So at the time that we become the most individual, the most separated, the difficulty of that is we lose perception of the spiritual world and we lose a sense of connection to everything that is. The benefit of it is that it sharpens our self-awareness. It sharpens our ability to think and to be conscious in a particular way that could only happen this way. So once that happens and we can begin to crystallize the I am self-awareness and we truly become self-aware, self-conscious, then two things can happen. Either we keep going down and we become more and more self-involved and become more materialistic, or we can begin to pull back up as that I am presence fully develops, and instead of just becoming a lower and lower beast-like form of being separate from everything, it instead becomes a transcendental consciousness where now with the fully awakened logical linear thinking and the ability to be self-aware, we can now fully awaken the I am inside of us and connect not just to ourselves, but start to expand back out to be transpersonal in our awareness. So that means that we identify ourselves with, to begin with, other people that are similar to us. And so we feel links to our family. And then we might feel links to our nation, and we're patriotic or whatever. And as we expand consciousness further, we might identify with larger and larger groups. But at the highest level of expanding our consciousness, we get to the point that we know that we're connected to everything that is. And that's what you find in Tibetan Buddhism. With the Bodhisattva vow, I will continue to incarnate to help all sentient beings until all sentient beings attain enlightenment. And that's the type of transpersonal Christ consciousness that we're talking about here. There's nothing separate in us from the sentient nature of all beings. It all comes from the unified Godhead. When that goes from being an intellectual construct to something that's as self-evident to us as anything else, we start to pull up here. Now that I am self-awareness can begin to transform our consciousness. So our detrimental thinking patterns, where we think very negatively, and we ascribe all types of angry and negative types of aspects to the people around us and to the things of the world around us, we can begin to transform that and illuminate it. Again, then we transform the life body and transform the physical body. Understanding that matrix makes sense of what's within the Rosicrucian process. Okay? So we're going to pause for a change of tape, and I'll take any questions people have while we're changing the tape. Was there a question a minute ago?
Yes.
Yeah.
You were saying that they were, the spirit beings were interacting with us and influencing us in a dynamic way.
Their nature is when they interact with us. And again, this is only at the most general level, but one can identify then the more Ahrimanic influences because they really encourage us to feel very separate from other people. They encourage us to really believe only in materialistic science and nothing of a spiritual nature. It's fine to lie, cheat, steal, get anything from anybody else because we're nothing but a biological accident anyway. Then in the most extreme form of the Luciferic, they lead us toward a variety of things, whether it can be in some ways a very self-aggrandizing type of spiritual development, where once you begin to get any type of spiritual understanding, you become the little guru, and like now you know everything and you get your own group and you do this whole trip. Or you can take it to a place where you just want to have ecstatic process all the time. And whether that becomes an ungrounded life that's just in spiritual process all the time and your life is kind of in a shambles otherwise, or a person actually becomes addicted to drugs, alcohol, or something else, that's another manifestation of it. The desire for constant ecstatic process without doing hard work through the entire grounded method. So again, these different beings affect us in different ways. And we got that going again? Okay? Yes, you bet. So, back to our story already in progress. Now that we have a little bit of background, we can talk about